The most powerful move isn't loud. It's not the scream, it's not the argument. It's the moment you walk away without saying a word, because silence. That's not surrender. It's a strategy. When they lie, manipulate, or try to humiliate you, they expect a fight. They expect chaos. But when you give them nothing, no words, no emotion, you don't just take back your power. You let karma speak for you. There are moments in life when words become useless, when every explanation sounds like desperation, and every reaction becomes entertainment for someone else. That's when the wise don't argue. They don't beg. They don't perform. They walk away, quietly, without defending, without warning, without a single wasted breath. Not because they're weak, but because they understand something most people never will. Silence is not absence. It's ascension, because when you stop speaking, karma starts working, and the people who once fed on your energy are left starving in your silence. Today we'll uncover 7 specific moments where walking away without saying a word isn't just strength, it's transformation. The final one will rewire how you see detachment, and may just be the quietest way to win. You knew they were waiting for it. The look, the twitch, the outburst. They needed your reaction like air, because without it, without your fire, they have no fuel. So when they pushed, when they poked, when they said that thing you'd told them in confidence, just to watch it sting on the way out of their mouth, you stayed still, not cold, not cruel, just still. And that silence, it didn't make you smaller, it made you untouchable. You weren't ignoring them, you were choosing peace over performance. And whether they admit it or not, that quiet tore through them louder than anything you could have screamed. Sometimes the most violent form of power is the refusal to play. They'll say you're being distant, cold, arrogant, but what they really mean is, they can't reach you anymore. Not like they used to, because before, they'd say one thing and watch you crumble. They'd twist a truth, and you'd run to untangle it. They'd leave you out, and you'd chase your own worth, like it was hiding in someone else's approval. Not anymore. Now you let the silence stretch. You let their accusations echo in the room, unanswered. And in that quiet, they panic. Not because you're gone, but because you're no longer available for manipulation. There's a shift that happens when you realize you don't need to convince anyone of who you are. When you stop reacting, you stop being a character in their drama. You become something else entirely, an ending they can't rewrite. You walk away without a word, and suddenly, they're talking to themselves. They expected fireworks, a scene, maybe a final text storm filled with question marks and accusations, but all they got was nothing. Not because you didn't feel it, not because it didn't hurt, but because some people don't deserve front row seats to your pain. You realize something. The louder you scream, the more they get to pretend they matter. And when you fall silent, truly silent, you become a mirror. They're forced to look at themselves. No noise to distract. No emotion to blame. Just the weight of what they did. That's when karma begins. Not some cosmic explosion, but a slow growing emptiness that builds in the space you used to fill. No confrontation. No apology extracted, just absence, thick, heavy, unforgettable. Sometimes, disappearing gracefully is the loudest thing you'll ever do. They called it dramatic, said you were making it a big deal, but only because you didn't give them the ending they rehearsed. See, they were ready for the explosion, the messages, the blame. They knew how to defend against noise, but they weren't prepared for the exit without applause. That's what silence does. It rewrites the ending without permission. You didn't beg. You didn't explain. You didn't even flinch. You just stepped out of the role they cast you in. And now they're still performing, but the audience is gone, and the stage is empty. This is the power of restraint, not to punish, not to manipulate, but to restore your own peace in a world addicted to drama. Because sometimes, the kindest thing you can do for your soul is to leave before they force you to become someone you're not. They always thought silence meant guilt, that if you didn't defend yourself, you must have something to hide. But you've learned the truth. Only insecure people explain themselves to the unworthy. You used to hand over explanations, like apologies, every word, a desperate attempt to prove your character to people who already decided not to see you clearly. But now you let your absence do the talking, because silence isn't weakness. It's proof you no longer seek validation from chaos. They'll twist stories, they'll present half-truths with full conviction, and you'll stay grounded. Because what they forget is this: truth doesn't panic, it doesn't rush to defend itself, it doesn't shout, it waits, and it always returns. They lied, and part of you wanted to fix it, to pull the truth out into the open, lay it down in front of everyone and say, "See, this is what really happened." But the moment you try to correct the lie, you step into their trap. Because liars don't fear facts. They feed on the reaction. They want your energy, your panic. You need to be understood. And when you stay silent, when do you choose stillness over chaos? They're left holding a story that won't last under its own weight. Truth is heavy. Lies can't carry it for long, so you stay quiet, not because you're unsure, but because you trust time to do what noise never can: reveal everything. They betrayed you, not with a loud crash, but with the soft cruelty of silence, withheld secrets shared, and loyalty sold for cheap attention. And it cut deep, not because you didn't see it coming, but because you never thought they would be the one. Your instinct said, confront, ask why, demand to know what you did wrong. But deep down, you already knew you didn't do anything wrong. They did, and they just weren't brave enough to face it. So you didn't scream, didn't slam doors, you just walked away, quietly, like closing a book mid-sentence, because you realized the rest of the story wasn't worth reading. And in your silence, they lost something they can't replace. Someone who would have stayed forever, if only they'd been honest. There was a time you would have fought for them, through confusion, through hurt, even through betrayal. You believed in their better side, the version of them you built in your head. But people don't become who you imagine. They become who they choose. And when they chose to betray you, they weren't making a mistake. They were making a decision. The silence you gave after that, it wasn't passive. It was intentional. It was your way of drawing the line, without needing to raise your voice. Because closure isn't always a conversation. Sometimes, it's a quiet acceptance that the version of them you loved never really existed. So you didn't fight. You let the silence fall like a curtain. Not because you were done feeling, but because you were finally done explaining. They didn't expect you to leave. Not really, because they confused your loyalty with weakness. They thought your consistency meant you'd always stay, no matter how far they pushed. And for a while, you did. You stayed through the small cuts, the subtle dismissals, the broken promises dressed as misunderstandings. But something shifted. Not all at once, just a quiet realization that love should never cost your self-respect. So you went silent. Not to punish, not to play games, but because you were done offering explanations to someone who only ever heard themselves. And now they notice the silence, not just the absence of your voice, but the absence of your energy, your presence, your care. They don't miss you. They miss the version of themselves they could only be when you were still there. You used to think closure came in words, a final talk, an apology, a clean explanation that tied everything up neatly. But life rarely offers that kind of ending. Some people leave you with fragments and expect you to build peace from the wreckage. So you stopped waiting for their words. You gave yourself the ending in silence, because you realized something powerful. Closure doesn't always come from them. It comes from you deciding the story is over. Not when it feels fair, but when it costs you too much to keep reading. So now, instead of chasing clarity, you choose stillness. Instead of replaying conversations, you reclaim your calm. They may never know what they did to you. They may never apologize, but your silence, it's not unfinished. It's complete. It's peaceful. They accused you of being cold, said you shut down, that you changed. But they never asked why, never looked past the silence to see the storm they caused in you. You didn't go quiet because you stopped caring. You went quiet because you finally realized caring alone wasn't enough. There's a kind of exhaustion that no sleep can fix. It comes from being unheard for too long, from explaining yourself in circles to someone committed to misunderstanding you. So you withdrew, not to escape, but to protect what was left of your spirit. And in that retreat, you found something, clarity, that the person who forces you to fight for your own voice is not your person. So now, you speak less, you give less, you reveal less. Not out of bitterness, but because silence became the boundary they could never cross again. They tried to bait you with sarcasm, with sideways comments, with subtle digs meant to bruise without proof. They were careful, just vague enough to avoid consequence, just loud enough to make sure you heard. And you did. You heard every word, but you gave them nothing. No flinch, no glare, no clever comeback to satisfy their ego. You just let it hang there. Their words twisting in the air with no reaction to hold on to. And that silence, it burned more than any insult ever could. Because people who poke don't want truth. They want performance. They want to pull you out of your peace and into their mess. But you stayed grounded, calm, still, and that's when you won. Not the moment you silenced them, but the moment you showed they could never move you again. They laughed behind your back, smirked in rooms you weren't in, spread just enough distortion to make others question your name. And for a moment you felt the pull, that urge to defend, to speak up, to clear the air before it choked you. But you didn't. You stayed quiet, not because you didn't care, but because you knew the truth doesn't chase crowds. It stands alone and waits to be seen. So you let them talk. Let the lies run their short, frantic course. Because rumors are like fire without fuel. They burn hot, but they burn out faster than people expect. And while they were busy performing character assassinations, you kept building your peace, brick by brick, in silence. They thought your stillness meant surrender, but all it really meant was that you were playing the long game while they exhausted themselves in the short one. They mistook your kindness for access, thought that because you listened you owed them your attention, because you forgave, you'd never walk away. But even the most patient heart has a threshold. Even the softest soul learns the art of silence. You didn't change overnight. It was gradual, a slow closing of the door that had been left open too long. Not slammed, just quietly shut. And when it closed, they noticed. Not with words, but with the absence of your energy, the unanswered messages, the space you used to fill so freely, now echoing with their own emptiness. That's the thing about silence. It doesn't announce itself, it just arrived. And when it does, the ones who took your presence for granted start to feel what they never thought they would: your absence. They used to be so loud in your life, always needed, always talking. And you gave your time, your thoughts, your presence, not because you were weak, but because you believed in showing up. But eventually, you started to wonder, who shows up for you? You ran through the conversations in your head, the ones you started, the ones they never followed up on. And one day, you just stopped reaching, stopped explaining, stopped making yourself easy to find. Not out of spite, but out of self-respect. And the quiet that followed, it wasn't lonely, it was cleansing. Because that's when you realized, a real connection doesn't need reminders. It remembers, I noticed. It reaches back, so when they ask why you faded, you won't need to answer. Your silence already did. They used to light up when you entered the room. Now they barely look up, not out of hatred, but out of comfort. They assumed you'd always be there, and maybe that was the problem. You were too consistent, too available, too understanding, when they gave you less and expected more. But silence has a way of recalibrating everything. When you stopped initiating, the conversations died. When you stopped pouring in, they didn't notice the cup was empty until the thirst hit. That's when they started reaching. Not out of love, but out of habit. But by then you'd already learned. You don't need to force your presence into someone else's convenience. So you stayed silent, not waiting for them to return, but realizing you were never supposed to be standing still for someone who never took a step toward you. They kept you around for the comfort, not the commitment. You were their safe space until they needed excitement. You were their steady hand until they chased someone more chaotic. And each time they drifted, you let it go, gave them the benefit of the doubt, told yourself they'd come back different. But they never did, because people rarely return changed. They return expecting the same version of you they left behind. So this time, you didn't wait. No speech, no goodbye. Just a quiet decision to stop being the fallback for someone who only values you when they feel unstable. They'll say you disappeared, that you ghosted, but the truth is, you were always there until you weren't. Not because you stopped caring, but because you finally realized they only missed you when they were bored, never when you were hurting. They tried to make you question yourself, with silence, with mixed signals, with sudden distance followed by unexpected warmth, just enough to keep you guessing. It was never direct, never honest, just emotional whiplash dressed as complicated feelings. And for a while you thought it was you. Maybe you were asking too much. Maybe you were overreacting. Maybe if you just stayed calm, stayed kind, stayed loyal, they'd meet you halfway. But the halfway point never came. Only more guessing, more confusion, until one day you chose something radical. Clarity, not from them, but from yourself. You stopped playing the role they never respected, and you didn't slam the door, you just stopped knocking. Your silence wasn't anger. It was self-protection, and the moment you withdrew your energy, they lost the game they thought they were winning. They never expected you to outgrow them. They thought you'd always orbit their moods, bend to their version of truth, wait patiently while they figured out who they were, even if it meant forgetting who you are. But something shifted, not all at once, just a quiet voice inside you that grew louder with every small disrespect, with every broken promise, With every moment you felt smaller just to keep the peace. Until one day, you stopped shrinking, not with fireworks, not with a fight, but with silence. You didn't send a final message. You didn't explain the years of hurt. You just became unavailable, not to punish, but to heal. Because walking away isn't always about them. Sometimes it's about finally choosing you. And when they look for you in the places they used to find you, they'll discover something chilling. You're not gone. You're just no longer theirs to reach. They said you changed, but what they really meant was you stopped tolerating what you once excused. You didn't get colder. You just stopped burning yourself out trying to keep others warm. They felt the shift, but they'll never admit what caused it. Because acknowledging your silence means confronting their own behavior. And that's something most people aren't ready to do. So instead, they label you distant, difficult, even disloyal. But deep down, they know they created the distance. They wrote in silence. They built the wall you finally stopped trying to climb. And now your stillness feels like punishment. Not because it's cruel, but because it's the first time they've had to sit with the echo of their own actions. You didn't cut them off. They cut themselves off when they chose comfort over effort and ego over connection. Now the silence isn't your burden, it's their consequence. They used to love how open you were, how easily you shared your thoughts, your dreams, your heart. But over time, they weaponized your openness, turned your vulnerability into ammunition, twisted your truth into gossip, laughed at the same pain they once asked you to reveal, and you learned, not all at once, but moment by moment, wound by wound, until you made a decision. No announcement, no revenge, just a shift. You stopped offering your soul to people who only knew how to step on it. You spoke less, listened more, not to reconnect, but to protect. And now they wonder why you're so guarded. Why do you seem so different? But they don't realize this version of you isn't cold. It's healed. It's careful. It's not silence out of fear. It's silence out of wisdom. They wanted a reaction, always. Because the louder you got, the less they had to look at themselves. But now there's nothing. No anger, no rebuttal, not even a sigh. And that emptiness, it terrifies them. Because silence doesn't just remove your voice, it removes their control. When you stay calm in the face of chaos, you expose who really needed the conflict to feel powerful. You show them that your peace was never something they could hijack. So they push harder, try to provoke, try to draw you back in with old tricks and familiar guilt. But the door is already closed, not locked, just no longer theirs to open. And that's the part they never expected. Not that you'd walk away, but that you'd never look back. They used to be your weakness. Their name lit something in you, a pull, a softness, a hope that maybe things could still work, that maybe they'd finally get it, but not anymore. Now, when you hear their name, you feel stillness, not numbness, not hate, just the absence of attachment. That's how you know the healing took root. Not in a loud breakthrough, but in the quiet realization that you don't miss the chaos anymore. You don't crave their apology. You don't replay the memories. You don't wonder what they're thinking, because the version of you who needed closure no longer exists. You found peace, not in revenge, not in making them understand, but in your own decision to stop carrying what they refused to hold. And the silence, it's no longer a weapon, it's your freedom. There will come a moment, quiet and unremarkable, when you realize you haven't thought about them in days. No ache, no bitterness, just space. The silence that once felt heavy now feels clean, uncluttered. yours. And while they may still think of you, still wonder if you'd ever come back, you won't feel the pull, because when someone loses access to the healed version of you, they lost more than just a person. They lost a future. You didn't walk away to teach them a lesson. You walked away because you finally learned yours. There's power in letting go without resentment, in moving on without needing anyone to notice. And the ones who truly get left behind, they're not the ones you forget. They're the ones who realize too late that your silence was never punishment. It was the sound of you choosing yourself. There's a certain kind of peace that doesn't make a sound. It doesn't arrive with applause or get posted for approval. It just settles in, quiet, steady, unshakable. That's what you found. Not in revenge, not in being proven right, but in the simple act of no longer needing to be heard by the very people who never listened. They may wonder why you never came back. Why didn't you explain? Why you let the distance grow until it became a wall they could no longer climb? But you don't owe them answers. You owe yourself peace. And peace doesn't shout. It doesn't chase. It doesn't beg to be understood. It just is. Let them talk. Let them rewrite. Let them wonder, because when you walk away without saying a word and never look back, karma speaks the loudest. And silence, that beautiful, brutal silence, finishes the sentence they never thought you'd end. If this story echoed something in you, something unspoken, something you've carried in silence, then this space was made for you. Subscribe, not for noise, but for clarity, not for motivation, but for mastery. Here, we don't chase revenge. We choose peace. We don't raise our voices. We raise our standards. And if someone in your life needs to hear this truth, don't argue with them. Just send it. Because silence, it spreads on its own.